What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video on the Z. Thank you as always for tuning in. Today we're going to tackle something that a lot of people overlook when they're building a drift car. But before we get into that, I have to finish up that trans mount and get this thing aligned. So let's get straight to work. The trans mount is done. That job was way harder than it should have been, but it's done. It's over. I don't have to worry about that anymore. While I do have the car up in the air, I'm going to check the trans fluid, because while I did fill it, I haven't checked it since I did that little test drive, and if it is low on fluid, that could definitely be adding a bit of noise as well. So figured might as well check it before we put this thing back on the ground and start that alignment. And the trans is topped off, good to go. Let's finally get this thing back on the ground so we can work on that alignment. Always nice to see this thing on the ground, just makes it look a bit more complete. Now I'm going to turn my attention to the alignment and finally get that taken care of. I did mess around with the settings on a camera just a little bit, so if you notice a difference, let me know if you think it looks better or worse. I'm still learning all the setups and stuff with the different settings and whatnot. I don't really know what I'm doing, so let me know. All right, it's been a while since I've done an alignment and suspension setup and all that fun stuff. And I kind of jumped the gun because I was just ready to align this thing, but I realized the height wasn't even side to side and the camber wasn't even side to side. So I didn't film any of it, but I just spent the last hour dialing in the height and the camber, because really you don't want to mess with your alignment specs until you've got everything else dialed in. So now that the height is set, the camber is set, now I can start adjusting the toe and get this alignment wrapped up. As far as setting the toe, I'm going to be using toe plates. If you've never used toe plates before, they're pretty simple. It's just a flat piece of metal that rests up against the wheel. And then I'm going to run a tape measure on either side of the piece of metal. And then you'll measure, basically you'll look at the difference between the front of the wheel, the measurement of the front of the wheel, and the measurement of the back of the wheel. And that will determine how much toe in or toe out you have, and then you make your adjustments from there. One thing to keep in mind with toe plates, you are measuring overall toe, meaning how much toe the entire car has, as opposed to individual toe per wheel. So you can have an equal measurement on the front and on the back and have both your wheels kicked one direction. So it's one thing to kind of keep in mind. It definitely takes a little bit of repetition. I've had to use these quite a few times in the past until I understood how they worked. And honestly, it's been a few years, so I'll probably have some trial and error this time around too. Got the alignment done, at least in the front. I still have to adjust the toe in the back just to make sure the tires aren't gonna wear too bad. But the front went pretty easily. If you've never used toe plates before, it's pretty simple. I kind of explained, you just have the one on each side, the tape measure running on the front of the tire, on the back of the tire. And then really, you're just taking the measurement and then adjusting the tie rods a little at a time. So I was doing like one turn on the tie rod on each side, because you want to make sure you're adjusting them equally on the left and the right. So adjust it, like I said, one turn on one side, one turn on the other side, then remeasure, see where you're at, and then just keep kind of adjusting that way, a little bit on each side, remeasure. It's kind of a tedious, time-consuming process, but it always works, and it's really not that hard. So glad that's done. Like I said, I'm going to tackle the back now so we can at least say the alignment is good to go. And we're back. It's been a few days since that last clip. I got the alignment done on the rear, so the whole car is aligned now. The rear's not perfect. The car doesn't have adjustable arms yet, so I just had to kind of max out the factory eccentric bolts to get as much as I can, and it's pretty close, so it'll work for now. On to the next thing, which is kind of what the video's about. The most important thing you have to do to your drift car before drifting, and that is to make sure that you have clearance in the front to allow for all that extra steering angle that we added. It's often something that people overlook. I know I've overlooked it in the past. You throw on some more angle, lower your car, get some different wheels. You go out driving and you realize you can't turn full lock because the thing rubs on a frame or on a pinch weld or on something. Or maybe it doesn't and you're fine, and then you go to drift it and you hit a bump and it rubs on something. So we're going to diagnose all of that right now, and we're going to do it pretty simply, and I'm going to show you exactly how. All right, to start things off, I'm going to remove the big center nut on the top of my coilovers, and that's because I want to take the spring out, but I want to take it out without adjusting the height or any of the other adjustments that I made when I did the alignment. Now, if you've ever tried to remove this bolt, or nut rather, you see that it turns the whole shock in order to fix that, we've got a little Allen key that goes into the top of the shock. And now we've got the wrench on that guy. And just crank them like that. And now we should have loosened this guy up. And we'll be able to pull the spring right off the coilover now. All right, with that nut taken off the top of the coilovers, we can jack the car up and yank that spring out now. All right, spring is out. Now I'm going to set the control arms on jack stands and lower it down. Effectively, the whole point of this is to compress the suspension entirely to its lowest point, and then I'll turn it lock to lock and see if it rubs on anything, fix whatever it's rubbing on, and then repeat the process until it's totally clear. All right, well, with the springs out and the suspension fully compressed, you can see it's definitely going to rub on the fenders. I mean, pretty cool fitment if you're into that. Okay, so I raised it up just a tiny bit because it was never going to clear the fenders, and I really hope it never gets that low. All right, so looking at the driver's side here, you can hear it's rubbing on something, and it is that wire harness right there. Other than that, we clear the frame, and I think we're okay. We'll just have to zip tie that wire right there up out of the way. You can see the tires just sitting right on that connector. Easy fix for the driver. All right, looking at the passenger side here, this is what I was most concerned about, is this little pinch weld in here. This guy, and then those brake lines in there. But this thing clears perfectly well. It's not rubbing on anything, nothing up there. If you did hear a little squeak, it's because it's rubbing on the jack stand, which is what I have the control arm perched on. But it's kind of hard to see in there, but there's nothing hitting. It all looks good. So now I'm gonna flip the wheel the other way and check clearance on both sides again. All right, so we're still on the passenger side with the wheel turned the other way now. And really the only thing it's hitting on this side is this wiring harness right here, this guy, and these power steering lines, which need to be tied up anyways. So I'm gonna get some P-clamps and just zip them to this frame rail, and I'll probably just do the same with the wire harness to get it up out of the way, because you can see it's kind of close up there. And if we come take a look at the driver's side with the wheel turned this way, same story. Everything back here, the pinch weld and all that, that's the hood cable that I zip tied up out of the way. It is all out of the way. It doesn't rub on anything. Pretty happy about it. So really surprised actually that it's not hitting anything. It's not hitting any of those pinch welds. It's not running into the frame or anything like that. I come from experience with 240s, and if you've ever had a 240 with modified steering angle, you know it runs into a ton of stuff and you have to cut pinch welds and hammer things, and it's a lot of work. And I kind of expected this to be the same, and I'm really surprised it's not. Maybe it's because I don't have a ton of angle. I think this GK Tech only adds like 15 degrees more than stock, but either way, I'm pleasantly surprised that it's not going to be a ton of work. That being said, it did compress way more than I thought. The fact that it was sitting on the fenders is not good, so I do have to fix that. I'm just gonna order a bit bigger, or taller rather, bump stops to put in the coilovers. That way they don't compress that much. Realistically, they shouldn't. I do have the car sitting fairly high, and it would take a big bump to compress the suspension fully with the springs actually in. But you never know. If I go flying off track or something like that, it could happen. And I don't really want to explode my fenders or tear up a tire just because it's, you know, it can compress that much. So a new bump stop is only like $4. So I'm just going to order a pair for the front, slap those on, and that will solve that problem. Well, that pretty much wraps up all the work in the front. Like I said, it's a lot less than I was imagining I would have to do, which is great. So at this point, I'm just going to wait for those bump stops. I'm going to leave the car taken apart so I can toss those in as soon as they show up. But I'm going to wrap up the video here. I'm going to leave you guys with a little time lapse of me kind of polishing up the paint on this side. I have an old buffer and a little bit of compound laying around, so I want to see what I can do. This paint is pretty trashed. Let me just give you a little glimpse of it. There's a ton of like hard water spots, and Just looks terrible. I'm not gonna go into super detail on how to detail because I really don't know how. I'm not great at it. Like I said, I just have a buffer laying around and some polish. So I'm gonna end it there. Enjoy the little time lapse. Maybe the paint will look a little better, maybe it won't. Either way, thanks as always for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya.